Hi, and welcome to Enchantment of Eternity's video on the best movies of the 90s by genre. This video is where I state my favorite movies that were released in the 1990s going by genre. This video is a part of 90s Week where I look at the best that this decade had to offer in terms of film and television. Now, genre is always a tricky thing as it is very subjective, as the whole point of genre is to identify certain types of films so that those who tend to like or not like those kinds of films know what they're getting into. Personally, I tend to enjoy films that are hard to classify in cross genres. However, I thought it would be interesting to look at all the different types of films in the 90s to see the best of all kinds of films. However, in this video, I get into specific genres, which again is subject to my own interpretation. I know it's inevitable there will be those who disagree with certain films belonging to certain genres, but know that genre is just a very loose term, and since this video is mine, I had to make the final determination, even if not everyone is going to agree with it. And of course, the films that is the best is also through the lens of my opinion. So let's get this started, starting with the genre of action, which is a pretty straightforward genre containing a lot of violence, guns, explosions, and whatnot. And my pick for best action film of the 90s is Die Hard with a Vengeance. This is by far my favorite Die Hard sequel, and I thought it worked really well as a suspenseful and engaging action movie where Bruce Willis's classic John McClane is paired up with Samuel L. Jackson's everyman character Zeus, and the two of them had amazing chemistry, and it was just fascinating to watch them run through the hoops of this villain played by Jeremy Irons, who was a great action villain. Next genre is adventure, similar to action, but less focused on the violence and explosions and more focused on a journey or quest. Adventure is a hard genre to pin down, so I turned to my good friend the internet to help me with this one, which gave me a lot of examples. And out of those, I picked my favorite, which is The Last of the Mohicans. This was a really touching film, arguably more of a drama than action, but it certainly is an adventure as it follows a group of people caught up in the French and Indian War of the late 18th century in the wilderness of New England, and it was an absolutely beautiful film. So now let me get to the science fiction genre, where I have separated into several subgenres. As you know me, I'm a huge science fiction fan. So first subgenre I'll cover is science fiction is Earth-based present. So this is for science fiction films set on Earth, not on space or another world, and also set in present times, not the future nor the past. So my pick for best Earth-based present science fiction movie is The X-Files: Fight the Future. In my opinion, this film is The X-Files at its absolute best and encompasses everything that made The X-Files great in one film, from the Mulder-Scully relationship to the weird encounters with dangerous aliens to the mysterious shadow conspiracy and the cloak and dagger investigations. Fight the Future delivers in spades. Next subcategory of science fiction is Earth-based future. So again, set on Earth, not space, but this time taking place in the future. And my pick for best science fiction Earth-based future film is The Matrix. It's kind of a spoiler to say this film takes place in the future, as it disguises itself as a present-based until you find out that this present is just a computer simulation used by a race of AIs that use it to pacify humanity in some post-apocalyptic future. So this leaves this film open to all sorts of great philosophical explorations, while at the same time having action sequences that blow you away. And they can have characters use action moves that defy the laws of physics, because it actually makes sense in this movie because they're in an artificial reality. So it's a great classic film. Next subcategory is space-based, so science fiction films that take place mostly in the reaches of space, so mostly taking place on a spaceship or other vessel. So my pick for best science fiction space-based film is Star Trek VI: The Undiscovered Country. The final film to exclusively feature the original series cast, and it's not my favorite Trek film, but still a great film that has a lot of political intrigue that almost plays out like a Tom Clancy novel, but in space. as Kirk and crew work to maintain the integrity of peace talks with the Klingons, where there is a conspiracy to sabotage them, and the personal journey that Kirk goes through in this film plays out really well. So next subgenre is other worlds. So this is for science fiction films that don't necessarily take place on Earth, but they don't take place in space either. They take place on another planet or something like that. And my pick for best science fiction other worlds film is Total Recall. Now, sure, the first half of this film does take place on Earth, but the second half on Mars, where we see a colony where the rich and powerful control the air and are willing to let innocent people suffocate and die to serve their own greedy purposes. This is a great mind-bending science fiction film which also brilliantly combines cerebral storytelling with mind-blowing action sequences. And the final subgenre of science fiction I'll cover is time travel, a pretty self-explanatory genre, a film about people who travel through time, be it the past or the future. And my pick for best science fiction time travel film is 12 Monkeys, which so happens to be not only my favorite movie of the 90s, but also my favorite movie of all time. 12 Monkeys tells an emotionally powerful story of a prisoner who travels back from a post-apocalyptic future where humanity is forced to live underground because of a deadly engineered virus back to the 90s to gather information about the virus so that the scientists of the future can help humanity reclaim the surface. However, the film covers more of Cole's personal story and brilliantly explores aspects of mental instability and makes us examine how we define insanity while telling a very touching personal story, and all the while using science fiction to ultimate storytelling effect. So that's it for science fiction, so let's move on to its cousin, fantasy. And I'll be honest, the 90s was not a good decade for fantasy. There were a couple really great ones in the 80s and a lot of good fantasies in the 2000s, but this genre was kind of in a lull in the 90s, so the best I could come up with for best fantasy movie of the 90s is Jumanji. Now, this movie was okay, however, it did feature the late great Robin Williams, who, as per usual, gives an amazing comedic performance that really elevates this film as we follow the story of two children playing a board game that affects real life. A pretty solid fantasy film, if not great. Moving on to other genres, let's cover indie films, which I split into two categories. So starting with the first, indie comedies, where my pick has to be Clerks. The very low-budget comedy that launched Kevin Smith's career and became a cult classic, as although having very low budget and subpar acting, the film still manages to be hilarious and engaging in a way that most big-budget mainstream comedies fail to do, making it quite superior in many ways, as we explore the life of those lowly clerks wasting away their lives. Such a great film. So the other indie category is, of course, indie drama, where my pick is a personal favorite of mine, but one in which I'm kind of alone in thinking, as critics pan this movie as one of Soderbergh's worst, but I personally think it's one of his best, and that is The Underneath, which is a film noir that tells a depressing story of a man who returns to his hometown after having abruptly run away from his life due to overwhelming gambling debts and the shitstorm he goes through when he tries to win back the love of his life. And this film perfectly covers the pitfalls of obsession and with non-linear storytelling methods used, as well as brilliant, unique stylistic choices that showcase the best of what Soderbergh can do to make this film, in my opinion, a masterpiece. So along the same lines, let's get into my next category, surreal experimental film, where the choice is clearly Lost Highway, which I would say is my favorite surreal experimental film of all time, as Lost Highway tells an unconventional story through metaphor rather than literal storytelling as most films do. And it uses the craft of filmmaking absolutely brilliantly, as it has amazing cinematography, an amazing soundtrack, great editing, acting, and everything else, as it really puts you inside the mind of a killer more so than any other film has ever done before or since, and is a really disturbing place to be. Moving on to the drama category, let's get into the next genre, war drama, where it's pretty self-explanatory, drama that takes place in a war. And my pick for best war drama is Saving Private Ryan, a film that brilliantly portrays the horrors of what it's like to be fighting in World War II, while at the same time telling a very personal story of a unit on a mission to save one man and the impact that this has had on his life. In my opinion, this is one of Steven Spielberg's greatest achievements. Next drama category is historical drama, which covers anything from history. However, I'm looking more at distant history for this category, so anything before the 20th century. And my pick for best historical drama is Braveheart. Still one of my all-time favorite films and a great epic. Even if it is very historically inaccurate, it's still an amazing story that's told so well with a lot of emotional twists and turns, and a story that really gets you involved and invested. Next drama category is recent history drama. So these are dramatic films set in the recent past, so within the 20th century, and my pick for best recent history drama is The Shawshank Redemption. A purely fictional film that tells a personal story rather than a historic one, but set in the 40s and 50s, and tells the very inspiring story of a man falsely convicted of murdering his wife and trying to find redemption in the Shawshank prison and dealing with prison life. The film is generally considered one of the best films of all time, and for good reason, as it is a true achievement of cinematic storytelling. So next drama category is contemporary drama. So that is a drama set not in the past, but in the present times. My pick for best contemporary drama is Leon the Professional. Now some may say this is more of an action or suspense movie. However, I personally love this film for its dramatic qualities and would actually argue it doesn't have that much action, and it is more of a personal story of a trained professional killer taking on a 12-year-old girl as his mentor and the close relationship that they form, which is at the forefront of this film and told so well. So another classic film. Next drama category is biographical drama fiction. So this is a film that covers a character's lifespan to tell the story of a character's life, but a fictional character, not based on real life events. And my pick for best biographical drama fiction is Forrest Gump, an epic, heartwarming film that is a classic storytelling at its best, as you rarely see, as we follow the life of a less than intelligent person going through life and having brushes with important historical events, while all the while, he brings his bright outlook to life, to any situation, ultimately enlightening everyone's life. And of course, the other side of the biographical drama, nonfiction. So a film that tells the real-life events of a character or characters, and my pick for best biographical drama nonfiction is The Insider, which tells the story of a producer for the news show 60 Minutes who deals with a whistleblower of a big tobacco company whose life is ruined by the important information he tries to bring to the public, and the struggles this producer goes through when his own company turns against him and tries to abandon the whistleblower. This is an amazing film that explores the pitfalls of the media and tells an inspiring story of two men willing to do the right thing at all costs. And the final drama category is romance drama. So a romantic film that is told in a dramatic way, and my pick for best romance drama is Show Me Love, a touching Swedish film that tells the story of an unpopular teenage girl forming a romance with a popular cheerleader type girl, and all the pitfalls they go through as the popular girl tries to keep the romance hidden as a fear of losing her popularity, and the effect this has on her lover, who is emotionally crushed by her actions. One of the best romantic films in my opinion. So moving on to the comedy genre, but sticking with romance, let's do everyone's favorite romantic comedy, which is a genre I particularly do not like, as the films in this genre tends to all be the same and follow the same formula, use the same tropes every time. However, there are a few exceptions. There are exceptions to every rule, and so my pick for best romantic comedy is Chasing Amy. Another Kevin Smith film. This film tells the story of a young man who falls in love with a woman. Only problem is she's a lesbian. This is not only a very funny film, but also at times a really dramatic one that explores the pitfalls of interpersonal relationships and has a particularly powerful ending, in my opinion, that really sticks with you. So, sticking with comedy, let's go on to the next comedic category, comedy funny. Now, you may be saying, what do you mean funny? All comedies are trying to be funny. True, but what I mean by that is outright silly comedy whose main goal isn't to tell a story or have romance or action or suspense. Its main goal is only to be funny. So my pick for best comedy funny is Ace Ventura: Pet Detective, as it is a really silly film with a plot I couldn't possibly care less about, but throughout it is funny as hell. And I could see why this turned Jim Carrey into the megastar that he is, as the laugh just keeps coming in this film through his portrayal of a very eccentric pet detective. Alrighty then. Next comedy category is comedy artistic. So these are more of the artistic comedies that have more to say and perhaps use filmmaking methods more creatively. And my pick for best comedy artistic is The Big Lebowski, a classic Coen Brothers film about an unemployed stoner that loves to bowl who gets caught up in a kidnapping scheme, and it's absolutely brilliant and draws a lot of its comedy from its rich cast of interesting characters along with the absurd situation he gets put into. Overall, a really great film. Next category is comedy spoof. So more of a satire film that's, spoofs other films' tropes, drawing attention to them for more comedic effect. This is a category that I think died in the 2000s, as most of the spoof movies released after the 90s sucked and ruined the genre. However, there were still a few very great ones in the 90s. So my pick for best comedy spoof movie is The Naked Gun 2.5. This is my favorite Naked Gun film and has a lot of hilarious spoof jokes, mostly spoofing on the typical detective genre. The Naked Gun 2.5 is just non-stop laughs, and it was just solid throughout. And the final comedy category is comedy action, which describes a comedy with some action or suspense elements. And for this film, I'm choosing a film that many might not think of as a comedy, but it certainly does have silly and satirical elements, even if it doesn't try, to do it for laugh out loud. And this is Fight Club. One of the proudest things I can say in life is I'm one of the few people that actually saw this movie in the theaters when it first came out, as it was a flop that would later claim cult status. But I loved it from the beginning. This is one of the few theater-going experiences I had when a film really blew me away, as this was put together so well and told a fun and suspenseful over-the-top satire on consumer culture and the counterculture that happens as a result of it. So moving on to some other genres, let's get into sports movies, which is a genre I'm typically not a fan of, as I don't watch sports. However, there is a clear best sports movie of the 90s for me, and that's Happy Gilmore. Yes, it's hard to imagine now, but Adam Sandler actually used to put out great movies, and this one was definitely his best, and a sports movie that actually had me invested because it was funny as hell, about a loudmouth slacker who fancied himself a hockey player but sucked at everything except the slap shot, so he found fame as an unconventional golfer who really ruffled some feathers, and this movie was hilarious. Next genre is teenage flick. And I'm afraid I'm going to have to go obscure again and name a film most people probably haven't heard of. I'm not trying to be all hipster, it's just most popular teenage films are crap. And this one was by far the best teenage film I have ever seen, and that is All Over Me. This film perfectly captures how it feels to be a teenager, the awe of discovering one's own preferences and learning to deal with the complexities of romantic relationship. It perfectly captures how difficult being a teenager is. Next genre is crime genre. Now, here I'm specifically looking at films about criminals rather than about law enforcement. So gangsters, thieves, what have you. And so my favorite crime movie is Pulp Fiction, the classic Tarantino film and the classic crime movie to end all crime movies. This movie broke all the molds with its non-linear dialogue-based storytelling, and that managed to create a piece of art unparalleled to this day, although many movies tried. So going to the flip side, next genre is cop detective movie. This genre is looking specifically at law enforcement, and for this genre I'm going to go with Seven, which is an amazing detective film for its realism. Has, rather than having tough swaggering muscle men waving their guns around and kicking ass, it shows more of what it's probably like to actually be a detective, as it's a couple of misanthropic police officers doing research and boring paperwork trying to crack a case, and which is they're finding very difficult. And more than that, it manages to be really unconventional by having a dark and twisted ending that breaks all Hollywood conventions, which in fact the Hollywood studio tried to change, but director David Fincher fought to keep it, and this film was one of his masterpieces that really put him on the map as a top director. Next genre is mystery. Now, this refers to any film which main plot involves a character or characters trying to solve a mystery, regardless of what the mystery is. And I'm going to be a bit unconventional again here and choose an unconventional movie, and I'm going with Dark City. Had to mention Dark City, as it is an amazing film about a man waking up with no memory, but he appears to be a serial killer who is being hunted by the cops. But things aren't what they appear, as there's clearly something much bigger going on here. And this film was simply amazing in its originality and hasn't really been anything like it since. Moving on to the next genre, which is suspense. A pretty broad term, but a film whose main purpose is to keep you in suspense. Similar to mystery and similar to like thriller, but slightly different. And my choice for best suspense film is The Usual Suspects. Talk about a film with an ending that blows you away. This was a greatly acted film with a rich cast of low-life scumbags caught up who are being manipulated by a mysterious mastermind, Kaiser Soze, and the way the whole thing unfolds is simply amazing. Okay, so now it's time to cover a genre I don't typically care for, and that's horror. And perhaps because of this, I'm going to pick a film that might surprise a lot of people, as it's just seen as okay, that is, if they've heard of it. And I think it's a bit underrated, and I much prefer it to the typical horror movie or like the torture porn or stuff like that. And that is 1993's Needful Things with Max von Sydow and Ed Harris, two solid actors who lead a solid cast and the Stephen King adaptation, which is actually one of my favorite Stephen King films, along with the underrated Dolores Claiborne film, which I almost mentioned, but that's not really horror. This film tells the story of a mysterious figure played by Sydow who enters a small town who offers people the item of their dreams, of their heart's desires, but the price he asks for is quite horrific in nature, which ends up turning this peaceful town into a bloody, murderous mess, which is a nice commentary on the corrupting nature of material desires. So getting to horror's little cousin that I tend to prefer, let's cover thriller. And thriller is similar to horror, but typically less bloody and murderous, but all still attempts to be scary, but in a more drawn out way. Or my pick for best thriller movie is The Silence of the Lambs. Obviously, as it's the quintessential thriller about a junior FBI agent played by Jodie Foster trying to track the infamous Buffalo Bill killer as she turns to the crazed psychologist Hannibal Lecter, whose character has become legendary, particularly in this film where he's portrayed brilliantly by Anthony Hopkins. This film was a thriller throughout, even if it was slow-paced at times, and it was certainly a really well put together film. Next genre is superhero comic book genre. This is a genre that didn't really take off until the 2000s. Even the first X-Men movie wasn't until 2000. It's hard to imagine as we're so saturated with it now, but the 90s offered very few outings for this. However, my personal favorite is The Crow, a dark and gritty film that comes off as a typical action movie at times, but it tells a basic revenge plot of a man going after revenge for the thugs that killed his wife, but with the twist that the man who's doing this is himself dead. A wickedly dark film with a goth twist. I loved it. So let's get into animated adult. Not adult as in porn. It's a shame that whenever the term adult gets used, it's associated with porn. But no, has an animated film that is not geared towards small children, but more geared towards older audiences. And my pick for best animated adult film is Beavis and Butthead Do America. I thought this was a solid film outing for the classic TV show about two idiots sitting on a couch watching TV, about their TV getting stolen, leading them to go on an adventure across the country while the FBI tracks them down, thinking that they're the two most dangerous criminals at large. Absolutely hilarious. So now let's talk about films geared towards children, and say my favorite family film, which is The Lion King. This is a film I remember seeing in theaters as a teenager, and it still had a huge impact on me. This is a family film that is a great film regardless of what age you are, and probably the most modern Disney classic that tells a really personal and touching story of a young lion who was meant to become king but had his throne stolen by his uncle, so he returns home to reclaim his throne. It's basically Hamlet but with talking lions and without the incest. So finally, let's get to my final genre, foreign language films. So these are films whose main and base language is not English, and for this I'm going to have to go with Run Lola Run. Even though I didn't see this film until the 2000s, it was released in 1999, making it a 90s film. Run Lola Run was an amazingly stylized film that is truly original in its intensity, as it tells three different versions of the same story of a woman running out to find a way to save her boyfriend's life. And I absolutely loved getting different perspectives on the same events. It's the main reason why I love shows like Lost. And this film did it first, and it was amazing. So that's it. I went through all the genres I cared to cover. Again, the genre choices had to be made even though everyone might not agree with them. But yeah, the 90s were simply an amazing decade for films, as this list illustrates, with some of the best movies of any genre. So this video concludes 90s week, but please be sure to check out my channel for many more videos on shows like Game of Thrones, Star Trek, Mr. Robot, Dark Matter, and more, as well as the occasional film review from time to time. So be sure to subscribe so you can keep up with all of that. And thanks a lot for watching.